Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. Every time I pass by the mirror in the hallway, I see a woman I barely recognize. Tired eyes, a thin line of lips frozen in memories. This is all me, Sarah, Kate's mother. My daughter was only 19 when she first brought Jason home. Tall, with perpetually tousled blonde hair and a smile that could melt even the coldest heart, he immediately caught my attention. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The sun was shining brightly, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass. Kate approached me in the kitchen, slightly embarrassed, but with a sparkle in her eyes. "Mom, meet Jason," she said, leading him by the hand. I looked at them, and my heart tightened with excitement. He was handsome, but I immediately sensed something unusual about him. Something that attracted and scared me at the same time. "Nice to meet you, Jason," I smiled, trying to hide my doubts. At that moment, I couldn't have imagined how much he would change our lives. Jason quickly became a part of our family. He helped with household chores, was always ready to support and care for Kate. I saw how my daughter glowed next to him, and although deep down it didn't sit well with me, I accepted it. We offered Jason to stay with us since his relationship with his mother was strained. Our house was big, and we could afford another resident. But the rules were clear: no promiscuity. My husband, Mark, insisted on this, and I agreed. However, one day, when Mark was at work, and I came home with groceries, everything changed. I entered the house, hoping to find Kate and Jason to help me with the bags. But they were nowhere to be seen. Passing by Kate's room, I heard a soft sigh. Opening the door, I found them in a position that made my heart stop. We all froze, and I couldn't take my eyes off Jason. "Come downstairs in 10 minutes. We need to talk," I said, and headed to the kitchen to make tea and calm down. Time dragged unbearably slowly as I waited for them. Finally, Kate and Jason came down, with guilty faces and bowed heads. "Mom, we're sorry. We didn't mean to break your trust," Jason began, and I felt the tension ease. "I understand," I replied, "but you must remember the rules. Let's agree. No more situations like this in the house. Find another place to meet." They nodded, and I realized they truly understood their mistake. But that was only part of the truth. The rest of the truth I had to hide even from myself. Because what I saw left an indelible mark on my soul. Jason, his confidence, his gaze, it was all too tempting for me. In the following days, I tried to forget that moment, but it wouldn't let me go. I felt drawn to Jason, and it was torturous. He was young, full of energy, and I couldn't stop my thoughts. One day, when we were alone in the kitchen, he approached me. "Sarah, how are you?" he asked, and I felt my heart beat faster. "Everything's fine, Jason, thank you," I replied, trying to appear calm. "Where's Kate?" "She went to meet friends, so it's just us today," he said, and I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. We started talking, and I noticed he became nervous. I couldn't help but ask, "Jason, what's wrong? You look troubled." "Sometimes it's hard for me to hold back," he admitted, lowering his gaze. "I understand, but we have to remember the rules," I said, trying to maintain control over the situation. "Maybe you could help me?" he unexpectedly suggested, and I felt my world crumble around me. "How can I help?" I asked, not believing my ears. "Just support me," he said, and I saw sincere desire in his eyes. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't resist. My hand trembled as I touched his shoulder. "Okay, Jason, I'll help you," I said. And in that moment, I realized this was the beginning of something inevitable. Every morning started the same. I would wake up early to enjoy a moment of silence while the house still slept. But that morning was different. There was something in the air, perhaps foreshadowing the events that were about to unfold. I got out of bed and headed to the bathroom. Passing by Kate and Jason's bedroom, I heard him quietly turn over in bed. I thought he was still asleep, but I was wrong. Jason had woken up and felt the need to go to the bathroom. He quietly got up, trying not to wake Kate, and walked down the hallway. When he approached the bathroom, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. It seemed strange to him that someone could be there so early. Curiosity got the better of him, and he peeked inside. I stood in front of the mirror, wrapped in a towel, having just stepped out of the shower. I hadn't noticed the door was open, lost in my own thoughts. Jason froze when he saw me. He couldn't take his eyes off my naked body, glistening with droplets of water. He carefully entered the bathroom, and I turned to see who had come in. When our eyes met, I felt my heart skip a beat. I should have kicked him out, told him to leave, but instead, I couldn't hold back. The attraction I felt for Jason was too strong. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling with tension. "Jason, what are you doing?" I responded, though I already knew the answer. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving my body. His hand touched my shoulder, and I felt a wave of warmth spread through me. In that moment, I realized we had crossed a line we shouldn't have. "I can't stop, Sarah," he said, his voice full of passion. I felt my knees go weak and couldn't resist. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt the warmth of his body. Our lips met in a passionate kiss that made me forget everything. We kissed as if it was the last time. His hands roamed my body, exploring every part of it. I was lost in the moment, in his touch, in his kisses. He gently pulled the towel off my shoulders, and I felt the cold air against my skin. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was what was happening between us. We ended up on the bathroom floor. Jason was gentle but persistent. His hands, his lips, everything was new and exciting for me. I felt every cell in my body respond to his touch. His lips explored my neck, my chest, my stomach, and I couldn't hold back soft moans of pleasure. This was something I had never experienced before. We moved together as if our bodies were made for each other. He was attentive to my every move, to my every breath. I felt his hands hold me tightly, which only heightened my sensations. In that moment, we were one, merging into one being. When it was over, we lay on the floor, breathing heavily. I looked into his eyes and saw the same satisfaction I felt. "Sarah, that was incredible," he whispered, his voice full of sincerity. "Yes, Jason, it was," I replied, not knowing what else to say. We knew we had done something wrong, but at that moment, it felt like the only right thing. I felt my life changing, and I couldn't believe it had happened. We quickly composed ourselves, and Jason left the bathroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning, that our relationship would never be the same. But I couldn't stop. My heart craved it, and I was willing to do anything to experience it again. The next day, I woke up with a heavy heart. Memories of the previous morning filled my head, and I couldn't believe it had really happened. I tried to act normal, but the inner tension was relentless. Kate, oblivious to everything, continued living her life. She was happy, planning her future with Jason. Mark had returned from his business trip, and I tried to behave as usual, but every time I met Jason's gaze, a mixture of guilt and desire flared within me. Days passed, and we avoided discussing what had happened. But one day, when Kate was at her classes and Mark was at work, I was home alone with Jason. My heart raced every time I heard his footsteps. We met in the kitchen, and I tried not to look him in the eye. But he approached me, and I felt that familiar flame ignite inside me again. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said quietly, his voice tense. "Jason, I know what you want to say," I replied, trying to stay calm. "It was a mistake. We shouldn't repeat it." "But I can't forget what happened," he said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "And I know you can't either." I closed my eyes, trying to manage the surge of emotions. I knew he was right. My heart and mind were in conflict, and I couldn't find a way out of this situation. "We can't continue," I finally said, opening my eyes and looking at him. "It will destroy our family." "But what if we can keep it a secret?" he asked, his voice full of hope. "What if no one ever finds out?" I knew it was wrong, but deep down, I wanted it. I wanted to feel his touch, his kisses again. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. "Okay," I said quietly, "but only if we're careful." His eyes lit up with joy, and he stepped closer to me. We met again in a kiss full of passion and desire. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt my doubts melt away. Our meetings became regular. We tried to seize every opportunity to be together. Every morning, when Kate went to her classes and Mark left for work, We found time for each other. It was our little secret, kept from everyone. One morning, after Kate had left for school and Mark had gone to the office, Jason came to my bedroom. I had just woken up and was still lying in bed. He quietly approached and lay down beside me. "Good morning, Sarah," he whispered, his voice full of tenderness. "Good morning, Jason," I replied, smiling at him. We lay there, enjoying each other's closeness. His hand gently slid over my skin, and I felt my body respond to his touch. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his eyes looking directly into mine. "Me too," I admitted, and in that moment, all doubts vanished. Our lips met again in a passionate kiss. His hands explored every part of my body, and I couldn't resist his touch. We were like one, merged in a passionate dance. Every touch, every kiss was filled with passion and desire. We were immersed in the moment, forgetting everything else. Jason was gentle and attentive, and I savored every moment with him. Our meetings continued, and each time I became more convinced that this was inevitable. We couldn't stop, despite all the risks and dangers. Our connection was too strong to break. But every time I looked at Kate and Mark, my heart tightened with guilt. I knew I was deceiving them, but I couldn't stop my feelings for Jason. I tried to convince myself that it was temporary, that one day we could stop. But every time I was alone with him, my promises crumbled to dust. In the end, I realized this was just the beginning. Our passion was too strong to ignore, and although I knew I was playing with fire, I couldn't stop. Jason had become more than just a son-in-law to me. He was my secret, my forbidden fruit that I couldn't leave behind. I couldn't go on like this anymore. The inner tension was tearing me apart from the inside, and I knew that my affair with Jason shouldn't ruin my daughter's life. But my attraction to him was too strong to just end everything in an instant. I decided that we should have one last farewell moment before we part ways forever. Everyone was home. Mark was sitting in the living room. Kate was busy with her own things in her room. The risk was great, but that only added to my adrenaline. I prepared like never before. Taking out my best lingerie, I carefully put it on, feeling the thin fabric hug my body. Then I chose a latex outfit that perfectly accentuated all my curves. I knew this was our last chance, and I wanted Jason to remember this moment for a lifetime. My heart was pounding, and every cell of my body burned with anticipation. I quietly approached his room, took a deep breath, and entered. Jason was lying on the bed when I walked into his room. Seeing me like this, his eyes lit up. "Sarah," he whispered, not believing his eyes. "This is our last time, Jason," I said quietly, approaching him. "We have to end this, but I want you to remember this moment forever." I slowly walked towards him, feeling my heart beat faster with each step. He got up from the bed and came to me, his hands wrapping around my waist. "You are incredible, Sarah," he said, his voice full of admiration. We started kissing, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss that made me forget everything in the world. His hands slid over my body, feeling every part of it. I got lost in this moment, enjoying every touch. He gently removed the latex outfit from me, and I felt the cold air touch my skin. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was what was happening between us. We ended up on the bed, and I felt his hands begin to explore every part of my body. He was gentle but insistent, and every touch brought me incredible pleasure. Our bodies moved in unison, and I felt waves of pleasure wash over me. His touches were like fire, and I couldn't stop the quiet moans escaping my throat. We were like one, fused in a passionate dance. His hands slowly slid down my back, and I felt him hold me tighter. He leaned towards my ear, his breath hot and heavy. "I want this moment to last forever," he whispered, and his words made me shiver. His lips began to explore my neck, and I couldn't hold back the quiet moans escaping my throat. He was so gentle, yet so passionate, and it drove me crazy. I felt his hands slowly slide down, exploring every part of my body. We moved to the bed, and I felt him start to kiss every part of my body. His lips were hot and greedy, and I felt waves of pleasure wash over me. I was completely immersed in this moment, forgetting everything in the world. His touches were like magic, and I felt him open new facets of pleasure within me. Every kiss, every touch was an explosion of emotions, and I couldn't resist it. He knew what he was doing, and he did it masterfully. When we reached the climax, I felt waves of ecstasy wash over me, and I couldn't hold back the cries of pleasure. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. His touches, his kisses, his body. Everything was perfect. Kate was in her room when she heard strange moans coming from Jason's room. She knew Jason was supposed to be there, but he wasn't around. Curiosity and concern got the best of her, and she went to check what was happening. As she approached the door to his room, the sounds grew louder. She carefully cracked open the door and saw us. Jason and I were on the bed, wrapped in passion. She froze in place, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Mom? Jason?" she uttered, her voice trembling. We quickly pulled away from each other, but it was too late. Kate had seen everything and couldn't believe her eyes. "How could you?" she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You betrayed me." Jason tried to say something, but she didn't want to listen. She turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, not knowing what to do. "We have to do something," Jason said, his voice full of panic. "I know," I replied, trying to gather my thoughts. "But first, we need to give her time." I understood that this moment would change our lives forever. Kate would never forgive us for this, and I didn't know how we would deal with the consequences. We had made a mistake that shattered our family, and now we had to find a way to cope with it. Jason and I stood in the room, not knowing what to do next. We knew the consequences would be severe, and we were about to face the toughest moments of our lives. But I was ready to fight for my family, even if it meant I had to sacrifice my feelings for Jason. A heavy silence hung over the house. Kate avoided Jason and me, and I couldn't find any peace from the guilt that consumed me. Mark began to notice something was wrong, and his suspicions grew with each passing day. One evening, when Mark returned from work, he saw Kate sitting on the couch, looking tearful and distressed. He approached her, sat down next to her, and gently asked, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Kate lifted her eyes and looked at him. She remained silent for a long time, as if struggling with herself, but then finally couldn't hold back. "Dad, I need to tell you the truth," she said, and tears streamed down her cheeks again. "Mom and Jason, they've been deceiving us." Mark looked at his daughter in shock. His face turned pale, and he couldn't find any words. He stood up and headed to my room, where I was sitting, trying not to think about what had happened. When he entered, his face was filled with rage and pain. "Sarah, is this true?" His voice was as cold as ice. I couldn't lie. I knew this would be the end, but I had to be honest. "Yes, Mark," I replied quietly. "It's true." He left the room without a word, and I knew we were in for a long and difficult conversation. Mark and Kate spent the entire evening in the living room, discussing what to do next. I could hear their muffled voices, but couldn't bring myself to join them. The next morning, Mark approached me and said he had made a decision. "Kate and I are leaving," he declared, his voice firm. "We can't live here after what happened. I can't forgive you, Sarah." I felt my world collapse around me. I knew this was inevitable, but it didn't make the pain any less sharp. "Please don't go," I whispered, but I knew my words wouldn't change his decision. Mark and Kate packed their things and left the house. I was left alone, feeling emptiness and bitterness. Jason came to me, his eyes full of sympathy and sadness. "We need to start over, Sarah," he said. "We need to try to rebuild our lives." I knew he was right. We had made a mistake, but we had to move forward. Our feelings for each other were strong, and we decided to fight for our future. Several months had passed since Mark and Kate left. I tried to rebuild my life with Jason, but each day was filled with challenges. We started small, trying to create a cozy and comfortable home that now belonged solely to us. We often talked about our mistakes, about how we could have done things differently. But every time we concluded that we couldn't change the past. We had to focus on the future. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jason took my hand and said, "Sarah, I know we've made many mistakes, but I want you to know that I love you. I'm ready to fight for our future, no matter what." I looked at him, my eyes filling with tears. I knew our feelings were genuine, despite all the hardships and trials we had faced. "I love you too, Jason," I replied, feeling warmth spread through my entire body. "We will get through this. We'll start anew." We began planning our future together. We decided that we wanted to start a family, build a home, and begin a new life. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were ready for it. A few years passed, and our lives gradually fell into place. Jason and I built a new home, filled with light and warmth. We started a new chapter of our lives, leaving behind all the sorrows and regrets. One morning, as I stood by the window watching the sunrise, I felt Jason wrap his arms around me from behind. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft and tender. "I'm happy," I replied, smiling. "Our lives have changed, but I don't regret anything." We stood together, savoring the moment. We knew that new challenges lay ahead, but we were confident we could face them together. We often thought of Mark and Kate, hoping they had found their happiness. We understood that our story was filled with pain and mistakes, but it was also a story of love and forgiveness. Now we lived for our future, building our lives day by day. We knew that our love was stronger than any trials, and that gave us the strength to move forward. We were ready for anything because we knew that the most important thing was to be together, no matter what.